Welcome to another episode of the Breathing Body podcast. My name is Flurina and I'm your host, and I'm so happy that you are here and that you share with me really the most precious thing you have, which is your time. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This podcast, the Breathing Body podcast, invites you to reconnect to your body and to come back home. We explore tools, practices, share experiences and stories which invite you to say yes to yourself, which I know is the most beautiful process we can ever engage with, and I call this self-love. And this podcast is for you sisters to access an archive of inspirations and resources to heal through eating disorders, eating difficulties, and move towards your authentic self and live a life beyond your wildest dreams. And in today's episode, this is very much part number 2 of my own story, or just an extended part of my healing journey. I released part number 1 in January, and I was bombarded and overwhelmed with feedbacks and questions and appreciations for doing it, and you asked for more. So here is more. And many people ask, so what happened in the very end? So suddenly you were healed. What was that last big game changer? And that's what I would like to talk about today. As always, I hope it inspires you, that you find encouragement and just something for yourself to go on. And as always, I'm beyond excited to read your comments. And if you do like this podcast, then please leave a review, leave a 5-star, share it with your families and friends. That's the greatest support you could ever give me. And I love it. I love this community. But enough said, let's dive in today's episode. So, I guess really a little bit, today's episode on a big level is actually about what eating disorder recovery can have to do with one's relationship. Because I got to a point where actually, yes, the maintenance of my eating disorder behavior had quite a lot to do with the relationship I had at that time. Or maybe, looking back in time, not per se with that person per se, nothing was wrong with him, but it had a lot to do with me not saying that one word which I really wanted to speak out, which was no, that's not the right relationship for me at that moment in time. So yes, I think in the first episode I shared how the very last phase of my healing journey, it's what I call my grief phase. It was the phase where indeed, I don't know, a year, 1.5, I could have cried every year. And there were moments I thought, am I depressed? And people looked at me and said, are you depressed? Do you need medication? But I knew, no, I'm not depressed. I was grieving upon that acknowledgement, the realization, what I had done to myself for the past 17 years. And going through that grief was actually biggest healing in itself. Finally, I could cry it all out. It was suddenly all that pain. I mean, it's such a tough behavior we have towards ourselves, right? If we do struggle with an eating disorder. And I was literally also swallowing down all that pain, and suddenly it came out. So yes, that last stage was that grieving stage. And very chronologically, actually just before I embraced that grief stage, I did a huge thing, which was I ended that one relationship which I kind of wanted to end for a longer time, and it didn't really feel right, and it kind of felt a bit toxic, and it dragged me down, but I kept going and I didn't end it because of fear. I was afraid. What would I do on my own? What happens if I was afraid of speaking the truth. I was afraid of speaking the truth and doing that one step which actually felt most right. And I stayed out of fear. I stayed in a relationship, and equally, why do I share with you? I could have equally stayed in a house, in a place, or in a job, or in a project, or whatever it is. For me, it was a relationship. But I stayed in that one situation out of fear, what might happen if I leave, and very much from that feeling of lack. I already felt the lack of being on my own, of not having someone giving me resources, someone caring for me, and I just stayed. I wasn't happy, and I knew I wasn't happy, and actually I knew that I would never be able to be fully happy in that relationship, because it wasn't the relationship of my life. And because I stayed for such a long time, I think that food almost, yes, food became an excuse, became a justification why I wouldn't feel happy. I would feel sad or frustrated, not heard, and I would just starve myself and then cry and say, oh, it's just also difficult with the food and I can't love myself, I don't like my body, da-da-da-dum. When actually it wasn't about the food. It was about that I didn't speak out that no, which I actually knew I need to speak out. And that's looking back in time, is such a clear example how, especially at the very end, I used my eating disorder as a tool to just stay in that victim role. I was afraid of taking courageous steps, let's face it. I was afraid of doing something which I didn't know at that point what would happen after. I always knew it would be the right thing to do, but I didn't dare because I feared that void after. And I just kept starving myself because then I had a clear thing to blame the situation in. And now I'm thinking, what suddenly gave me the courage to say, no, I need to stop this relationship? What was that moment? I'm actually not quite sure what the last real thing was which made me do it. I think one thing clearly, I started realizing that I would always say, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to do. And then I had a friend and she told me, you know exactly what you have to do. You know. If you tell me I don't know, this is a lie. I was very triggered. I was frustrated. I hated her in that very moment. And I knew she was right. She told me into my face, if you tell me I don't know what is the next step, that's a lie. And if you keep telling that to yourself, then do it. But that very much was the way she looked at me. And together we talked about how, of course, as long as I keep telling myself, I don't know, then I literally won't know what the next step is. And I recognize that I don't know is a pattern. As long as I say, I don't know whether I should leave or I should stay, I don't know. As long as I was in that, I don't know, I was the victim, I don't know, and I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to face any consequences. I didn't have to go out, look, where would I live, what would I do? I didn't have to do anything because I don't know. But the truth is, and that's what I learned from that moment, that we always do know what the next step is, even if it's teeny tiny baby step. And that sounds very simple, but yeah, what I did do was sitting down, closing my eyes, put my hand onto my heart and ask my soul, what's the next step? And because I had practiced hugely arriving in my body by then, I just knew I have to leave. And that was the step I had to do. And that's what I did. And in that very moment, what did I do there? I followed that thread of what makes me feel alive. That relationship ended up being a toxic environment, and it didn't make me feel alive. But really, what does true lightness means? True lightness for me is a sense of feeling alive. So if we really want to break free from eating difficulties and from an eating disorder, we have to ask ourselves, what makes me feel alive? If I ask myself that question, that moment, I saw myself without that man. I saw myself in my own flat, just having lots of time for my own things. That's what made me feel alive. And as long as I didn't really listen and take the answer to that question serious, I would have kept being dragged into the eating disorder. But because I said that no, and I followed the answer of that question, what makes me feel alive, which was to be on my own, to break up. Literally, that sounds poetic, but that's how it was. I've ended it, and I woke up the next day and I felt so light. I felt the lightest I've ever felt in my life. It was a spring morning, it was a Saturday. I got up, I opened the windows, I went to the market, I bought flowers, I cleaned, I put my room the way I've wanted it, I put those clothes on I've always wanted to wear. And it was so much easier and so much more joyful than I've ever thought it would be. And I know it brought, I'm sure, lots of joy for both of us in the end. And why do I share that with you? Also, yes, sometimes we are afraid to take a step because we fear what might happen after. But as long as we don't just do it, we don't know, and we can lose ourselves. Believe me, I did literally lose myself of scenarios of being on my own, have no house, have no money, never ever find someone again, be without friends, and kind of almost becoming these worries. That held me back from doing the step. But then by saying, okay, I feel your fear and I put you into my backpack and I go forward anyway. By doing that, I did it and it was so much easier. It was so much easier and everything turned out so differently than my crazy thoughts would have ever imagined. So that is what, for example, relationship can have to do with eating disorder recovery. And again, why do I share that with you? I share that with you because you might think, oh, I have enough from these food difficulties. I have enough from struggling with food. That's what I told myself. I'm so exhausted and tired of my eating difficulties and of starving myself. But the question really was, what really do I have enough from? What really, let me ask you, what really do you have, as we say in German, your nose full? What are you really tired of? Is it your relationship? Is it the job you're doing you actually don't want to do? Is it the place you are living in? Is it what is it? Is it that you keep telling yourself you're not good enough? Is it that you keep telling yourself I hate whatever it is, you know what I mean? But ask yourself, what is it really what you had enough? And Stop telling yourself that you don't know what the next step is. Because if you just sit down in that very moment, close your eyes, put your hand to your heart, she knows. And again, it doesn't need to be that you buy that dream house right tomorrow. It can be a baby step. It might be call that person, buy that book, go to that event. Just say no to that tonight. It can be baby steps, tiny steps. But trust me, you know what the next step is. So ask yourself, what do you really have enough from? What is it really? What is it really what you're tired of? What it is really what you're exhausted of? And then acknowledge that. And then step by step, ask your soul, what's the next step? Go and do that step. And then the next step follows. And the more we get into that trusting flow and dynamic, the easier it gets. And the quicker you know what it is and you feel it and you do it. And that is that uncovery process. That's why I keep saying it's an uncovery process. You don't have to recover from anything. You are not broken. You are whole. You are whole. Being in pain, let me remind you, doesn't mean that you are broken. Being in pain means you are healing. You are transforming. And therefore, if you're not broken, you don't need to recover. It's an uncovery process. Uncover all those desires which really want to be brought to light. And how do you notice these desires? If you connect with your body, with her, if you open your antennae for your feelings and emotions, if we sense, that's when we feel. And if we feel, within the feeling, that's where the intuition arises. And you're intuitively, you know what the next step is. And that's the power of the feminine. By the way, there will be a whole episode about the feminine, because once I started to just do these steps and tiny steps and follow that, I started following my intuition. And intuition, that's the feminine principle. That's our innate power. And oh girl, oh sister, it feels really good to reclaim my innate power. I'm talking a lot, but the good thing is this is a podcast, so you can stop at any time. And yeah, one more thing as we now talk about the feminine, which I wanted to share with you today, is how if we say no to anything, to someone, to a project, any no in the outside is a yes to yourself. And if eating disorder, uncover, recovery isn't a process about saying yes to yourself, then I don't know what it is. For me, it's very clearly a process of learning to say yes to yourself. So if we say no in the outside, it's a yes to yourself. And the more we say no to the things we actually want to say no to, the more space opens itself up. Space. The more you receive space and time, and the more space there is, the more you can actually receive, lean back, rest into that space. And that is the feminine too. To be able to receive, lean back. That is the feminine principle too. And when I said no to that relationship, suddenly there was so much space. And I was able for the first time again to just receive. To receive the life I was born into. And I was suddenly able to allow myself to take breaks. To give myself a break. And it's within the very break, the doing nothing, That's where we sense, that's where we feel, and that's where our intuition arises too. So that last part also had to do with creating space to receive, to take a break, and with that, to just enjoy. I completely forgot what it means to enjoy life. And if we only talk about relationships, of course, eating disorder recovery can also have to do with saying yes if it's the right relationship. I am in a relationship and I love my relationship and it feels right. I could say fully yes. And I've suddenly learned with a partner, from a partner, I've learned again to enjoy, to just do joyous, lush things, to actually not start working until 9 in the morning and spend 2 whole hours to go for a walk and just have a coffee because it feels nice. And that's also something I want to share with you. Can we again reclaim doing things not to be enough, not to look good, not to achieve, not to tell them to deliver? Can we allow ourselves again to do things just because they feel good? And I feel that's a wonderful place to end. Maybe make a list or do something today. Or actually ask yourself, what are the things I do in my life simply and just because they feel good and because she loves doing them? And yes, for me it's going to a coffee shop. I could spend all my days, at least 2 hours a day, and just going to a coffee shop, enjoy that oat flat white and just drink that coffee because it's a thing I love doing and it feels good. It feels good to me to be in a nice coffee shop and I love to do it with my other half. But I like to send you off with that message. What are the things? How often do you allow yourself to do something simply because it feels nice? Yes. So let me summarize. You know, and you know that you know. So stop telling yourself the lie that you don't know. You know what the next step is. And it's time to break the pattern of I don't know and go forward and do it. That's what is called growing clarity. Allow yourself to say no in the outside because that's a yes to yourself. Ask yourself that question, what makes me feel alive? And then go and do it because what the world needs is people who are alive. And number 6, what is the one thing you do every day just because it feels nice? Simply because it feels nice. And thank you so much for your time, for listening. And I hope that there is 1 or 2 teeny tiny gold nuggets which you can take for yourself onto your path. And yes, maybe all go forward knowing and live a life beyond our wildest dreams. That's my slogan and I love that slogan because that's what I stand for, that's what I do. And I love it and I want you all to be able to do that. And I'm so much looking forward to read your thoughts, your comments. Visit me on Instagram, that's a wonderful place to share and grow this community. And what is left to say? In April, I've got another round of my free masterclass. It's now in a 3-series part, which is such a gift. One evening is simply too little to share with you all I want to share with you. So join me in April and let's dive in and let's shine light onto these things which really want to be looked at. What are we actually talking about? Okay. Enough from me. I send you lots of love. I hope you're well and as always, trust your heart, trust your feet, trust your belly. Lots of love.